Our next presentation is Reputational Providers and What Makes Them Effective. At this point, I'd like to introduce Matthew Stith, who will be presenting Reputational Providers and What Makes Them Effective. Matt is an industry liaison at Spamhaus and traveled from the U.S. to join us today. This is Matt's first time presenting at NANOG, and it's a pleasure to have him with us. With that, welcome, Matt.
You cold in here, Tim? Is anybody else freezing? No. All right, let's just make sure I'm doing all this right. So here's a bigger picture of myself, already introduced. Thank you very much, Steve. But, essentially, yes, I'm Matthew Stith. I'm from Spamhaus, and we are a domain and IP reputation provider. And, one thing that I've learned is that a lot of folks don't really grasp some of the things that go into providing a reputation service. And there's many out there, and anybody who has a reputation service, they're really not worth it unless they have a defined policy in the way that they do things. And here we're talking about how Spamhaus is trying to help people strengthen trust and safety on the internet. That's, yes, it's something that our marketing team came up with, but it is part of that mission there to help people fix their problems, fix their challenges, but also increasing the cost to the adversaries out there. So today we're going to be talking about the policy that we have at Spamhaus, and how this drives a lot of the things that happen to be published in our lists. And to let everybody know, we don't just have a dartboard that we throw things at and say, oh, that thing's going to get listed today. There is investigations that happens. There's things that we do. There are rules that we follow to ensure that things that are going into that zone are there for a reason. So let's look at IP reputation first. A lot of what happens with the IPs is very manual to start out with. So you look for indicators, the indicators of maliciousness. Is this domain in a bad neighborhood that we've already seen phishing, malware, DDoSes, etc. coming from? And it helps us understand that, okay, maybe that what these guys are doing is wrong, is incorrect. Do they have a host name on that IP? Is any of this making any sense to what we would be looking at? We also do look at the positives. We don't just say, oh, everything's bad. We do want to look at the positives of what an IP has on it, so we can say, all right, these guys are doing what should be done to ensure that their users are going to be protected, and the things that their network is doing isn't going to impact other users on the internet. And just like anything with a policy, it's not like, okay, I've done it, it's done, I don't need to do it anymore. You have to constantly evolve it, because 20 years ago, you're talking, more or less spam and some phishing. Then we moved over to malware and other types of and whaling and all sorts of evolutions of the way that badness works. Now we're talking about ransomware, where there's been the subject of residential proxies that I'm glad is finally being talked about amongst the NANOG community, because this is something that is a big challenge to folks. But you constantly have to evolve that policy. So looking at domain reputation, it's more of a gray scale, because domains can more easily move from place to place to place. It's not saying that IPs can't move from network to network, but you see domains move quite more often than you do see IPs moving throughout. So there is that gray scale on there, and it's pretty much a negative to a positive score, and you fall somewhere in there. So you got to think about, if I'm registering a new domain, that's going to be like a negative hit to you because it's a brand new thing. We've never seen it before. So what are we going to say about that? What are we going to think about it? It's going to have some type of negative to it. It's not to say that you're necessarily bad. And also, we find that many people, when they're looking at reputation data, they look at anything that says negative on there means I have to ignore it completely, or I have to drop it, or I have to block it. That's not necessarily the case. Now, does it mean that maybe keep an eye on it? Absolutely. But you can use these things as data points. You don't have to just say it's in there, so it has to be bad, so I have to never allow it on. And there's those multiple factors in there. Also, again, configuration. I can't say this enough, but out of what gets put into zones that we publish, a lot of it is based off of misconfiguration. People just have no reverse DNS; it's completely blank. Or somebody's like, "I'm just going to put my IP on as the reverse DNS." That is a clear indicator to us that either they don't know what they're doing or it's a malicious party, and it's difficult for a provider to understand if somebody is actually who they say they are. And then finally, context is important. You need to understand why something has been scored in the way that it is. So, we've done the thing where we've broken it up into things like the infrastructure. Where is it hosted? Who's around it? Is it sending email? Have we found something that's on the internet referencing this? Is it something that's being mentioned in forums and carding forums, or in forums that people are trying to sell other people's data? It helps us get that context and be able to assign specific context to people. So when they do see that something's in there and they want to reach out to us, they'll be able to see those certain contexts and be able to make those decisions. One thing that I haven't mentioned that was on the other slide too, and it's on this slide as well, evidence is critical. You have to have evidence for why you're doing something. Now, does that mean that there's evidence for every single IP that's in our list? Not necessarily. And I know that kind of sounds weird, or wrong, but if an IP is in a group of 10 IPs and 9 of them are doing something wrong, probably that 10th one is doing something wrong as well. And there is some guilt by association that is going to happen when you're doing reputation. So we're one of the few providers, and there are some others out there that do escalations. And essentially, this is last resort. This is also something that is done manually through vetting to ensure that we're doing these things and we're doing them, with the proper things in mind. And this is essentially folks that don't want to work with us. They don't respond. We reach out to them multiple times. They're not honest about, like, we've had people that said, yeah, I terminated the user. 5 minutes later, we see the same activity. Or they'll bounce people throughout their network. They'll be like, okay, they were in this range, now I'm going to put them in this range, now I'm going to put them in this range. So you just more or less get to a point where you're like, well, I can't trust what's going to happen on this network, and I've seen X amount of abuse. I'm not going to give it a number on this, but I've seen X amount of abuse throughout this entire range, so I'm going to put this entire range into the zone. I will tell you why it's going into that zone, but it's essentially somebody who does not want to work with you, or is definitely not being truthful about what is happening on their network. With great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben, or depending on what universe you're in Marvel, it's definitely something that we have to be sure of. Now, accuracy is important. It doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, but the people that we work with, the services that we provide to people, is far-reaching. Anybody who provides a reputational service, you have to be accurate in what you're doing. You can't just willy-nilly put things into zones, because it's so important that you don't do the bad things. When it comes to legitimate networks, there have been many times where somebody's like, well, all I get is spam from Gmail. Why don't you just block Gmail? Now, while yes, that will block some spam, there is much more legitimate traffic happening on Gmail than there is illegitimate traffic. And you need to toe a certain line when you're talking about putting somebody into a zone. So you need to take that responsibility seriously, and you need to understand, when to do certain things. It doesn't mean that you can't call them out publicly, say something about, hey, we're seeing this, we're seeing that. And that's something that I encourage anybody in the room. If you're seeing something bad happening, definitely point it out. Because, if it's only happening on your network, how's anybody else going to know that it's a problem? And in my previous life, I worked in hosting at Rackspace, and I would see people jumping from different services within our system. And then if they're doing that, that means that they're going over to DigitalOcean, to AWS, to OVH, and just continuing to abuse these services. If I had the mindset of the time of not being so internal about keeping things close to the vest, I think that I could have helped those other networks stop those problems before they even started happening on their network. So we're going to go through a couple scenarios here, and I'm trying to make sure that we're there is beer up there, so I'm not going to keep you away from that. But and definitely I want to have discussions and answer questions if I can. But this first scenario, so Stellar Group SAS, they were this was somebody who we were doing a manual investigation, and we found that this RDP.monster was essentially a bulletproof hoster that was spelling remote access that was completely anonymous, no KYC, and we were seeing it actually trying to do stuff to our systems as well. So it was advertised as this, and what we ended up doing is we threw them into our spam house block list, and we find this ASN, what 203168, and it belonged to Constant Moulin. I'm terrible at pronouncing things, but we saw this and we kept on increasing pressure on it. We didn't know at the time of Stellar Group SAS. We just knew about Constant Moulin. And we kept on increasing pressure. We reached out to the upstream provider to say, hey, we have this problem. And this is something that we do constantly. We reach out to upstream providers to say, look, you have these bulletproof hosters on ASNs that you are in charge of. Is there anything that you can do about it? And provide them as much evidence as we can so they can continue to keep their networks clean and get all those bad people off. So what ended up happening is they had made a mistake in their OPSEC, and essentially it revealed to us that it was the Stellar Group. So all of this was manual research looking at certain things, and finally we ended up throwing them into our do not route or peer list, which is the drop list, and we were able to see where they were going to. We were able to understand that, okay, they're moving from ASN to ASN, and now they were on this leased IP range, and we were able to proactively put this stuff in and be able to knock it down before it was even a problem for any users. The problem is if we block it, yes, list it, we don't block it, other people block. But if we list it, it's only people that are utilizing our data. So it is something that you definitely want to make sure that you can get taken down. We eventually were able to get a takedown from this, but it was one of these cases where this is an example of a manual escalation where things constantly had to escalate until we were able to get to the point that there was enough pain or at least enough publicity around it that we were able to help somebody get a result and remove these people from the network. So our next one, KDDI, legitimate company. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with KDDI, but they did have a /22 that was being taken over by a malicious group. And this is an example of a manual piece of research that turns into automated. So we found that this /22 was hosting thousands of domains. Every single one of them was scam. It was either phishing, or it was fake merchandise, or it was malware, all sorts of badness that was on these domains. So we find all these and we throw them into our zone. And what ends up happening there is, yeah, we found all of them, but you continue to do research, you continue to look at stuff, and we found that for every 1,000 domains that we threw in the zone, they just registered 1,000 more. And it was the same type of scams, same type of things going on. So we had to sit there and think, okay, what can we do? Is there a pattern to all this? The good news is there was a pattern. There was an easier way for us to be able to identify them. So we used automation that was able to stick to the policy, that was able to stick to the understanding of that. And speaking with other reputation providers, they do this type of stuff too, to be able to say, all right, here's this group, we're able to identify certain aspects, certain characteristics that they always follow. Because I know that in certain things, I'm really lazy. The bad guys are lazy too. They don't want to have to do some of the same things over and over and over and over again. So, they're going to be lazy in some of the things that they do. Some of them are like, I'm only going to use this one registrar. And sometimes that can be all that you need, where it's hosted and where they registered it, and be able to just link those two things together and apply that as policy. So we were able to get those types of things and then put that automation in place and continually go through it. And it also had KDDI be able to, through the SBL notification, the Spam House Block List notification, to resolve the problem. And then we were able to have those domains stop being registered because they lost that access to be able to get in. Again, if we throw it into our zone, it doesn't mean it's going to be dead. It just means anybody who's consuming what we have can take some action on it. One last thing that I think is very important for any audience is to understand, as I said a few minutes ago, share anything that you can. And sometimes even embarrassing stuff is great to share, because there's so many times where somebody may have had a website compromise, or somebody didn't update a server correctly and somebody was able to get remote access into it. Being able to share these stories, now you may have to do it in a trusted group, but try to share these things if you can. I understand that some people have legal requirements and they can't share things, but make sure that you can share as much as you can. What you see is unique, because what's happening on anybody's network could be completely different across the board. So having that ability to share and having that understanding that, hey, we can offer this stuff back and forth. And when you're talking about sharing data, if you were talking about sharing data with Spam House or another reputation provider, we don't really care who it is. We care about what they're doing. We care about those tactics that they're using and the procedures that they're using. We don't care about the other stuff. We want to be able to gather all of that stuff together, and the relationships that we have with law enforcement, we can give that stuff to them, and then they can go and find the people. We don't care about that part. So a lot of the times when you talk about data sharing, people are like, oh, that's PII. That's not what we care about. We care about being able to identify certain things so we can cut off the bad actors. We're not that concerned about who they are. So think about some useful data that you can provide is things that are listed right here. I can read off the list, but I think everybody else in the room can read as well. But your detections and what you see and sharing that with people can, again, help strengthen trust and safety. And then, last thing, these are resources that we have. We have that drop data that's free. Anybody can grab it. It's out there. We have statistics that are out there. We have blogs and stuff. If you want to read them, that's great. If you want to use the stuff, that's great. If you don't, that's fine as well. But we want to be able to give back to people, and we want to let people understand that, hey, we want to help. And lastly, there's the any questions part, but one last thing that I do want to say is, when you see something from Spam House and you're like, this is incorrect, talk to us about it. Don't just go to a forum and be like, Spam House sucks, I'm terrible, I hate Spam House. Please talk to us about it. And yes, there may be some standoffishness when we come in, because our poor ticketing guys are getting threats. They're getting, all sorts of things that are happening to them, getting yelled at all the time, every day. So, there may need to be a little bit of patience there with them. But with that, I'll go to questions. We'll go to you, sir. Can we do the mics for the audience?
Wait, this one works. Come here.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
My name is Sergey. I was supposed to read out the questions asked remotely,
Yes.
but there is no question. There is. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with mine. So, yeah, you wanted the information to be shared, but as far as I understand, many issues could be resolved with some data if you will receive some data from the RIRs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you receive any assistance from the RIRs except the public data? And if yes, if no, how do you see the possible cooperation?
We do not receive any data, and one thing that I would appreciate from RIRs when we're looking at things like public data, and this is more a challenge that we run into with LACNIC, is the rate limiting that happens that is not defined anywhere, and really hinders our ability to do an investigation of something. And I would love to discuss how we can get data, and how we can share back and forth. And that's one thing that I want to be clear about as well, is that we want to share back and forth. We don't want to just consume. We want to be able to give back. We want to be able to help and let people understand this is where we're seeing the bad things. So I would love to have that conversation, to figure out what we can do, because other than the things that are publicly available, I'm not exactly sure everything that's behind the curtain with the RIRs.
It is.
Yeah.
Hi, Luhan from Larus Limited. You may not know us. I run a company lease out IPs. We're probably the largest leaser on the planet. We serve over 1,000 network across globe, and we manage about 10 million IP addresses. So we do interact with you on a daily basis, just by the sheer size of the IPs we manage.
Mhm.
Of course, there's always better guys statistically, somehow there, right? I've personally write to Spanhouse many times, at least 3-4 times I can recall that. Because I believe, to my knowledge, I started as a long-term leasing of IPs. So before, what I did was basically everybody leads to spammers and I charge them a yearly rental rate of equivalent of buying. Then I start to reduce it to 10% of buying price, which is more reasonable, but I need good folks to lease it as OPEX compared to CAPEX, right? So we trying to reach out to Spanhouse. We'll say, hey, we want to know who the bad guy as well, because they're definitely not paying us enough to lease it for doing anything criminal, right? We want them to just use IPs. So we want to get some signal from Spanhouse. As you said, the communication is two ways. We will happy to provide you, abuse the statistics, which we have a lot because of the sheer different size of network we manage. Mm-hmm. But every time the communication with Spanhouse goes like, it's almost feel like we were criminals, They were like very conservative. This is not, take down that, and then we reach out to our customer. But at the end of the day, we don't manage networks. Our customer have a network, and we're not sure if they're a good guy or bad guy. We have our internal algorithm to decide if that network is a good network or bad network. But obviously you have better expertise and stuff that we were trying to cooperate and trying to understand from a perspective that, how we identify who is a good guy to provide IP to, so that we cut the problem from the source. But that has been struggle for the past few years with Spanhouse on that. But we do have one of the lowest abuse rate, but still it's a very struggle to cooperate and even have a proper communication with Spanhouse on, how on a oversized scale, how to cooperate.
Yes, and again, what I was referencing back to, it's a little standoffish, and that's more or less the weight of what happens to them day in and day out. And the one piece that I can always offer, I'm not on that ticketing team. I don't answer tickets, thank goodness. I'm past those days. I'm no longer on abuse desk. But have you offered to share anything?
Yeah, I will send you email off the list later what I've sent to your team. But at least, I don't know how many times, I personally send emails to your team at least 3-4 times, and rest of my team. We don't run networks, period.
Yeah.
We have a lot of IPs. We don't run networks. But that simple message of we just lease IP to the network seems haven't crossed to your abuse team yet.
Yes. So
They have to say, hey, Larus network or cloud innovation, which is my network, cloud innovation network, you have to take action. No, we don't run network, guys.
So yeah. So the hearing we don't run the network when you're the ones that are reaching out to us.
But we do have to manage the reputation of the IP as
Yes,
the
understood.
abuse of the customer.
Yes.
And we do cut the bad guys. Don't get me wrong. We share the same goal. We want to cut the bad guy because we don't want our asset being abused. From that sense, you have to understand. We share the same goal financially and also from the company perspective, right? We need to get abuse report. We need to be contacted, but we'll forward you and we'll tell you who is our customer. If that's some of our customers bad guy, or you think the entire customer is just a criminal, then we'll just cut them off, right? But that piece of information never get across to your team, and your team always come, hey, you are the one running it. It's your IP. Yes, it's my IP, but it's not my network.
So I think, that sounds like there's a breakdown in communication.
Yes, we tried very hard.
And and that's why I'm here. To have these types of discussions.
Yeah, we can talk offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is so hard to just identify who is bad, who's out. Because it's not like we're having a FaceTime phone call and I can see you and talk to you and have these types of things and understand exactly who you are and what your challenges are. So it is definitely something, yes, we should be talking about.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So here is the online question online. Matt Petich is asking, what's the right way to report the errors in Spamhaus data for the reputation data for their IPA resources that need to be resolved? Very similar question to.
So typically we don't accept anonymous reports. So we kind of need to know that who it is reporting to us. We need to know that it's an entity. You don't need to be like Sergey. I just need to know that it's entity 2475 that's submitting to me, and then what you've submitted to me, and then I can put a reputation around like who the submitter is. So we do have a community portal that is available for people to submit to. That allows certain types of intelligence. If somebody wants to go to at scale, that is something that we would have to address one-to-one. But if there's more or less you're seeing certain things and it's bite-sized type of stuff, that's something that we do have an API that people can submit to and throw us data over on. And that's something where we identify out and recognize those that are doing significant contributions. It's actually something that we learned from the abuse.ch team that we work hand in hand with now. So it's essentially like that. There is a submission portal and then there's an API available. But if there's something that's more like you want to stream us data, that's something that would need to be a conversation to figure out what it is that you want to share, because I want to give you data, that's great, but I need to know what it is, what the requirements are around it, how much is there going to be, so we can properly prepare to onboard it.
Thank you.
Yes. John?
Good afternoon, John Brown. Not representing any logo on my polo shirt. With respects to the providing of numeric resources through maybe a leasing arrangement, I also do that in some respects. Very strict terms and conditions in my contract with the party that is using those addresses that basically says we reserve the right to revoke RPKI, revoke routing privileges, and communicate cease and desist to upstream transit providers as the actual RIR licensed, if you want to use that word, resource holder. So if we see through Spamhaus or through other reputational, trusted reputational providers that an address block or a particular address is being abused, and that client of ours who's running the network is not taking immediate proactive steps, or reactive probably steps, we have the contractual legal obligation or right pursuant to those agreements to immediately revoke those routing for that for those prefixes. So I would encourage anybody that's in that world to be able to, sure, they're not running a network per se, but you should have the contractual capabilities to cancel and revoke that quickly to maintain your reputation, to maintain your brand, to make sure that those addresses are valid and usable.
Absolutely.
And I will say that in years of working on and off with Spamhaus, yes, there is some of that standoffish, but that's also a valid reason to show up to places like Nanog and others to build those reputations to help make the process smoother. So please go out and buy Matt a beer or get him a beer in a few minutes.
Just hand me one upstairs. You don't need to buy
Exactly.
one. Yeah.
So add to John is that I actually in 2016 invented was something called abuse fee. So we charge actually $20 nowadays $40 per abuse if they were listed in your SPL or in a reputation database. So that will get expensive really quickly if you actually spammer using my service. And not mention we do a terminate you. But what I'm trying to hear with Spamhaus and the leasing providers such as and the growing need of leasing in the market is that because the one owned IP doesn't control the network. And we have an incentive to know who's the bad guy before we even hand out the IPs.
Mm-hmm.
So a solution, an API call of a potential reputation check would be appreciated, and that could be one of the signals provided to people like us that will reject bad guys before it's even started, not aftermath.
It is something that we are working on. It is the challenge is just more or less how everything was built is more or less it was built like a startup. So, you have silos of data, and right now it's the movement of getting everything into that single cylinder. So that is something that we do want to be able to provide, and we actually want to work with other reputation providers to be able to just put it all together and be able to get it out to folks. And this is me because I don't do sales. Yes. I would love to be able to just give that to people and just throw that out and just say, here are the problems. Here's the mirror. This is what you look like. And that is something that we are working towards, to be able to provide that data out, to be able to let people know, hey, here are the problems on your network. And then be able to provide at least some context in terms of what it is. And rather than just saying, bad IP, we want to say bad IP, phishing, badness type of thing.
And also that you should provide, which is what we do internally from our network point of view, our IP management point of view. We use transformer models basically because we manage over 10 million IPs over so many countries. So I feed the data into the model. So basically we assign what we call a risk factor to each networks of our customers. So from our point of view, if you go over the line, you get disconnected, but it's not black and white. There's a wide range for networks that from a perfect guy who, there's got somebody sitting there 24 hours to deal with abuse to, really worst criminal on earth. That is, most people is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
They're lazy sometimes they're not. So we assign them a risk factor score. And I think Spamhaus potentially could do the same thing to somehow assign a score to that and tell the risk factor of that network. It's not necessarily the guy who running a network is bad. It could be that they are just lazy.
Yeah.
Lazy is a kind of badness in terms of the network as well. So we assign that, and we use that signal to decide if customer get discount or get a more expensive service or get cut off.
Yeah. We do assign a reputation of ASNs and networks. That's not something that we have public facing, but it is something that we do use and utilize. And yes, there is that gamut of, white to black, or I'm sorry, whatever, allow to block. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. We've gone way over.
I appreciate the spirited conversation, Matt, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.